Hey, I'm Randy, and you're watching The Cheap Audio Man. Here at The Cheap Audio Man, we talk about high-value hi-fi home theater and headphone equipment. And today, we're talking about comparing the Klipsch RP600M 2, the new one, to the RP600M, the old one. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's see if you should really upgrade or get the originals. Hey, all you speaker DIYers out there. You know, when you're making your speakers, you need to make sure that you have audiophile equipment throughout the entirety of the process. That's why Sith Audio has created Sith Audio clamps, speaker enclosure clamps, just for speaker enclosures. They aren't good for anything else. And they're not just regular wood clamps from Harbor Freight that fall apart after you use them twice. That's right, Sith Audio speaker enclosure audiophile wood clamps. $99.99 a piece. All right, so if you get 6 of them, $594. That discount is only going to be going on through the rest of the week. Okay, how do they do that discount? Volume. Sith Audio audiophile speaker enclosure DIY audiophile speaker amps clamps. They make audiophile speaker enclosure clamps the right way, the Sith Audio way. Available at Speaker Express exclusively. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We have over 470 videos. DACs, amps, speakers, turntables, everything. Like this video too. You can always take it away. Like it though. Between two speakers. That's what I'm doing. Sitting between two. Anyway. Klipsch RP600M versus 600M Mark II. Not really versus, we're just going to talk about the differences here. If you're interested at all in hi-fi, you've probably seen videos about the 600M, and more recently, the 600M Mark II. 600M, this one, very popular speaker for the last few years. This was one of the first speakers that I purchased and then did a video on for the channel. I got a little history. Got a little history with the 600Ms. 600M Mark IIs just came out probably less than a month ago. They come in at $750. That's the retail price. I did a dedicated review for the 600M Mark II. I will link that right here if you would like to go check it out. And if you want to know more about this speaker, go check it out. There are some key differences here, not only in the design, but in the sound as well. But we'll talk about that later. Let's talk about specifications. Yeah, specifications. Okay, the new one, the 600M Mark II is rated at a sensitivity of 94.5 dB. That means how loud it's supposed to play at 1 watt at 1 meter. Although there's some questions surrounding Klipsch's sensitivity ratings. Some people say, well, they rate it in room. That's not really like anybody else, okay? Anyway, it says it's 94.5 dB sensitive. It's not. Zero chance it is. The originals say they're rated at 96 dB. It's not. There's no way it is. When one is considering how other companies rate their sensitivity. Really, the only reason you need to worry about sensitivity is about amp pairings. With a speaker that has a higher sensitivity, you can use a lower wattage amplifier and get the same loudness as you would out of a higher power amplifier. Basically, how loud it plays at 1 watt. Doesn't really even matter though, because most people, shockingly, don't even listen at more than probably 2 or 3 watts max. Most people. I'm not saying all people, I'm saying most people. A couple of watts is way louder than you think it is. Very similar frequency responses as reported by Klipsch. 44 hertz on the bottom up to 25,000 hertz on the top for the Mark II. For the originals, it's 45 up to 25,000 hertz. So you get one dB lower on the new ones. They both have a 6.5-inch Sarah metallic woofer, and they both have a 1-inch titanium tweeter. Waveguides are horns. The second generation has a bigger horn compared to the first generation. Does that make a sonic difference? I don't know. Does that make a soundstage and imaging difference? Maybe. The grills look the same, but they're actually a little bit different. So because the speakers have a few differences in the enclosure design, the grill on the original is a little bit thicker, wider at the bottom than the grill on the new one. And the reason being is there is a difference in the baffles. So there's an edge at the top all the way down to the bottom. On the originals, there's an edge at the top. It doesn't go all the way to the edge of the baffle though, and then it stops right about here. But the edge basically kind of reduces as it goes down. So baffles are a bit different. They look to be the same thickness, so the grills are a bit different. On the back, now we can do that. The Tractrix horn on the back of the original extends out, and it is flush mounted on the new version. The binding posts are also different. The newer Klipsch has metal binding posts and wire jumpers, whereas on the original there are plastic binding posts and metal strip jumpers. Easily changeable though. If you think the wire, like, don't buy the new one just because it has a wire jumpers. Go make your own if you want wire jumpers. The other difference is on the originals, the vinyl wrap design wraps all the way around the speaker to the back. Oddly enough, the new one does not have the same finish on the back. It's just matte black. The horns feel pretty much the same. So there's a flange, and then inside it feels like there's a little slot on both of them. So takeaway here, bigger horn, different binding posts, different jumpers. The original, I like the fact that it actually has the finish all the way around. Doesn't matter, not really, because the rear of the speaker's not even going to be seen. Going into this, I didn't really know what to expect because I didn't have the RP600Ms, the originals, in-house when I did the dedicated review. I just did a video where I compared the new 600Ms to the Sony SSCS5's much less expensive speaker. And while I was doing that review, I thought to myself, I should probably get the originals in here. I should probably do a comparison because I think comparing the originals to the new ones is probably more useful to people than comparing a completely different speaker in a completely different price range and with completely different engineering. That was still a fun video to do. So I bought the 600Ms because they are on sale for $397 right now on Amazon, which is a significant discount over the $750 retail. Almost half as expensive as the originals. This is something to take into consideration because Klipsch speakers hang out on Amazon, even discontinued ones. New in-the-box Klipsch speakers are widely available still on Amazon. And sometimes you can get a heck of a deal on a discontinued speaker. And sometimes they don't sound very different. Sometimes the older ones sound better than the new ones, in my opinion, only of course. So I didn't particularly know what to expect. I was excited though, and this comparison was a ton of fun. I spent a few hours comparing them today. Bigger difference than I thought there was going to be. I thought maybe I was going to be hard pressed to hear any differences at all, but I did hear some. It wasn't really subtle. It was pretty easy to hear. Let's talk about bass. If I had to sum things up about bass, the first generation hit harder, or they at least sound like they hit harder. They're punchier on the bottom end. Intergalactic was much thicker and palpable on the first generation as it was on the second generation. I'm not saying the second generation is bad, because actually I think the second generation's bass is more in line with the rest of the frequency response. These seem really boosted. And I don't care. I actually like the sound of these better than the second generation because they are punchier. I think if you're looking for more balanced bass, then I think the second generation is probably the way to go. As far as clarity in the bass, I could tell zero difference. I listened to So What by Miles Davis off the Kind of Blue record. Got some notes down here. The 28 second to 31 second is kind of a bass solo. Do 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 do. Mama, Anyway, it was way thicker on the first generation as it was on the second generation. Maybe not way thicker. It was thicker. Then there's a doo on the bass, and it kind of hangs out a bit. And I really was leaning in to see if I could hear any type of clarity difference. I didn't hear a clarity difference. Now, all of this comparison was done without level matching. There's a reported difference in the levels here with sensitivity. So to get a really, really good comparison, you have to level match speakers. But in practice, I was using my old decibel meter on the phone here. I didn't hear any differences. So I don't think a simple difference in sensitivity is going to cause the things that I'm hearing. The second generation has a newer cabinet design, and I think it's braced a little bit better. And that could be what I'm hearing, because on the first generation, this enclosure might be resonating. It could be getting a little bit boomy inside. So these woofers, I think they appear to be the same woofer. They may be different woofer, but it could be the cabinet that I'm hearing on the first generation. Even if it is the cabinet, I don't really care. I listen to a lot of rock and roll. I actually kind of preferred the first generation over the second generation. Shoot to Thrill was definitely thicker, bumpier on the first gen than the second gen. Let's talk about mid-range. If the first generation had more bass, the second generation has a more forward mid-range. Hello by Adele. Sometimes I say Adele by Hello. Hello by Adele. Her voice was much more forward on the second generation, which means it felt like it was in front of the speakers. The second generation, compared to other speakers, always feels like it has a forward mid-range. In comparison to each other, though, the mid-range on the first generation seemed more in line with the speakers. It didn't seem behind them, but it definitely felt that it was on the same plane as where the speakers were at. Second generation, pretty forward. As far as the sonic differences, the first generation had more detail, more air, more clarity in the voices than the second generation did. At the 6-second mark, so right at the beginning of the song, you could hear the reverb much easier. Now, we're talking a little bit about treble here, but you could hear the reverb at the 6-second mark way easier on the first gen than I could on the second generation. It just hung out a little bit more. Just more air sounds. I could hear more on the first generation than I could on the second generation. Coming Undone by Korn off the MTV Unplugged record. At the 22-second mark, Jonathan Davis and some backup singer are singing at the same time. It was way easier to hear the backup singer on the first generation than it was on the second generation. 22 seconds, if you want to try that out. If you want to get both of these, try it out for yourself. Alanis Morissette, King of Pain. This goes up into the treble a little bit, but that song is recorded pretty sibilant, which means the sh, s's and the t's sounds can be really exacerbated on a speaker if there's any type of boost in the frequency range. That frequency range is around 6,000 hertz and a little bit higher. Very easy to start figuring out where voices, electric guitars, and things like that are if you just download a free decibel or real-time analyzer. So I use Decibel X. I don't have any affiliation with them. They have a free version, which is riddled with ads. But you can get that, download it on your phone, use the microphone in your phone, and just listen to your song. Watch the real-time analyzer, and when there's a cymbal crash, see where the pop is. And it'll actually give you the actual frequency. So sibilance is happening around 6,000, really around 6,500 hertz is where I hear it and where I see it. Both of these speakers did a phenomenal job of not being sibilant. I was actually really surprised. The Sony SSCS5s are way more sibilant than either of these speakers. Going into it, I thought these speakers could and would be sibilant, and neither one of them was, which is pretty cool. Shoot to Thrill, AC/DC at the beginning, they were both very crunchy, but again, I was hearing more detail coming through the first generation than I was the second generation. Let's talk about treble. This is probably the biggest surprise for me, because I heard a lot more air, a lot more detail in the cymbals in the top end on the first generation, as I did on the second generation. Sinnerman, the beginning of that song, bunch of 16th notes on the hi-hat. But at the 7-second mark, the drummer lifts his foot off the hi-hat a little bit to give it just a little space, and there's a so like that. That 7-second mark, I could hear, and I played the drums, kind of, still do, but I could hear that way more clearly on the first gen than on the second gen. Reverb, air, crispness to the cymbals. The 600M first generation wins, without a doubt, over the second generation. I preferred the treble on the first generation a lot more than I did on the second gen. Shoot to thrill at 53 seconds. There's a cymbal crash, also way more apparent on the first gen than the second gen. There's just more going on, more clarity on the top end and in the mid-range on the first than the second generation. What are my final thoughts? For me personally, I believe that the first generation is better for me. I prefer it over the second generation. I think the only thing that the second generation is doing better than the first gen is controlling the amount of bass. And that might not even be a plus for you. For me, it was kind of a negative because I like the really punchy in the face type of bass on rock and roll and things like that. I don't need neutrality. I don't want neutrality in a speaker. I want a speaker to move me emotionally. One of the biggest differences between these two speakers, is just how forward the first generation is compared to the second generation. So if that's your thing, if you like that, if you like a presentation, especially in the vocals, that is really in your face, then the second generation is for you. However, I hear way more detail in vocals on the first gen versus the second gen. For me personally, I put more of a preference on vocal clarity than I do on vocal forwardness. But there's a big difference here. And that could be for you. You may love it. Treble clarity. I think because there is such a forward lean on the second generation, I think it's covering up detail, not only in the mid-range, and really mid-range clarity probably has more to do with treble clarity than anything else. So I don't know what the frequency responses look like on either of these speakers. I've never measured them. Frankly, I've never even looked at people that have measured these speakers. So wherever there's a rise on the second generation, I think it's covering up detail because I'm just not hearing it compared to the original. I think this is another case of, well, good for the consumer. My preferences are not your preferences, but my preference here is the first generation. And at $397 today, it would be a no-brainer decision if I was buying these, which I just did. Now here's the problem. I was thinking about buying these from Klipsch. Now I'm thinking about just keeping the first generation, sending these back to Klipsch. These Klipsch have a definite flavor, but the second generation is a completely different. If this one's chocolate, this one's rocky road now, because it is not a incremental improvement upon the first generation. This is a completely different speaker. Just like the ELAC B6 and then the B6.2, those speakers couldn't sound more different. I think these speakers sound more similar than the ELAC debut first gen to the debut second gen, but there's a different sonic difference. And I prefer the first generation. But I put high value on clarity. If you're listening to either of these speakers by themselves for a while, I don't think you're really going to be missing anything per se. One of the magical things about a Klipsch speaker when I put it back into service after I haven't listened to it for a while is the clarity and the excitement on the top end. And I'm actually hearing more of that from the first gen than the second gen. So as for me, I like the OGs a little bit better. So if you want to support the channel, you can sign up for Patreon, patreon.com/cheapaudiman. Every Sunday night we have Patreon-only Zooms. We also have a Patreon-only Facebook group and a Patreon-only Discord server, and we do Patreon giveaways. You can also use the thanks button. Down at the bottom of the video, next to the share button, a little heart with a money sign in it. You can buy me a cup of coffee if you'd like, or 2, or 10, or none at all. Don't feel compelled to give. I will link both of these. Those will be affiliate links, which means if you click and you buy, I do get a commission. But it doesn't cost you any more. So it's a great way to support the channel. You can also sign up for Amazon Music or Tidal Music. Tidal's running a deal right now, $9.99 for 3 months of service. So if you've never tried Tidal, now's a good time to check it out. $10 for 3 months. If you click through and you get a trial, I do get a couple of dollars for that. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. Binge listen maybe through one of your new Klipsch speakers and fill your soul with happiness. And with that, I'm Randy. I'm the Cheap Audio Man.